A man worth $200 billion who doesn't wear a watch, rocks the same leather jacket everywhere, and co-founded his company in a Denny's booth. The internet calls Jensen Huang the modest billionaire. But is the humility real, or the most expensive brand he's ever built? Let's get into it. Where the modest billionaire legend actually comes from. Picture a man worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $170 to $200 billion. Picture the kind of fortune that ranks you, on any given week, as roughly the 8th richest human being alive. Now picture what you think that man should look like. The yacht the size of a city block, the private island with its own zip code, the garage full of cars that cost more than most people's houses, the watch that could pay off a mortgage with the spare change melted out of its casing. Now throw all of that away, because none of it fits the man we're talking about today. The man we're talking about doesn't wear a watch at all. He'll tell you why, and it's almost annoyingly profound. He believes now is the most important time. So why would he need a device strapped to his wrist constantly reminding him of all the other times that aren't now? He wears the same black leather jacket to nearly every major appearance, a piece of clothing so consistent it has become a kind of personal logo. And when he co-founded the company that would eventually make him one of the wealthiest people on the planet, he didn't do it in a glass tower or a venture capitalist's mahogany boardroom. He did it over breakfast in a booth at a Denny's. This is Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, the quiet architect of the entire artificial intelligence boom, and the internet has crowned him with a title that follows him everywhere he goes: the modest billionaire, the humble one, the grounded immigrant engineer who got obscenely, astronomically rich, and somehow forgot to let it ruin him. But here's the thing about titles the internet hands out for free. They're rarely the whole story, and when a man controls the picks and shovels of the most consequential technological gold rush in modern history, when his roughly 3% slice of one company is worth more than the entire economies of some nations, the question stops being a fun bit of trivia and starts being something worth actually investigating. Is the modest billionaire real, or is modesty just the most expensive brand of luxury a man at his level can possibly afford? So that's exactly what we're going to do across this video. We're going to put the legend on the table, turn it over, and look at every angle. We're going to follow the money. We're going to walk through the houses. We're going to sit inside the company he built and ask the people who survived it what it's actually like. And then, near the end, we're going to watch the carefully constructed calm of the humble engineer crack wide open on a podcast in front of the entire world. And we're going to ask what really lives underneath the leather jacket. Stick around, because the answer is far more interesting than a simple yes or a simple no. But before we can understand the billionaire, we have to understand the boy. And the boy's story does not start in Silicon Valley. It starts in a place so far from the gleaming campuses of the tech world that it almost sounds made up. Let me take you to rural Kentucky in the early 1970s. Jensen Huang was born Jensen Huang in 1963 in Tainan, Taiwan. His family later moved to Thailand for his father's work, the kind of move that uproots a childhood and replants it somewhere unfamiliar. Then, around 1973, with unrest stirring in Thailand, his parents made a decision that countless immigrant families have made before and since. They sent their two boys, Jensen and his older brother, across an ocean to live with an uncle in Tacoma, Washington, hoping to give them a shot at something better. And here's where the story takes a turn that nobody could have scripted. The relatives the boys landed with were recent immigrants themselves, still finding their own footing, still learning the lay of a brand new country. So when it came time to enroll the boys in school, they made a mistake. They thought they were signing the children up for a prestigious American prep school, the kind of place that launches young people toward bright futures. What they had actually enrolled them in was the Oneida Baptist Institute, a religious reform academy in Clay County, Kentucky. And at the time, this was one of the poorest counties in the entire United States. This was not a school for the children of the privileged. This was, in large part, a school for troubled youth. And to pay for it, Jensen's parents back in Thailand sold nearly everything they owned. Imagine the gap between what those parents believed they were buying and what their 9-year-old son actually walked into. Jensen was far too young for the academy's actual classes, so during the day he attended the local elementary school. But at night, he lived in the boys' dormitory, surrounded by much older, much rougher teenagers. And like every student there, he had a daily work assignment. His brother was put to work on the school's tobacco farm, a place Jensen Jensen has described as feeling something like a penitentiary. And young Jensen? He was handed a job that sounds almost too on the nose for the future founder of the world's most valuable company. He was assigned to clean the bathrooms and the toilets every single day for around 100 teenage boys. His one wry wish, as he's recounted it over the years, was that the boys would simply be a little more careful. The world's most important AI billionaire spent part of his childhood as, in the words of one headline, a 9-year-old janitor, and the bathrooms were the easy part. Jensen was an undersized Asian immigrant kid with long hair, heavily accented English, and absolutely no local connections in a tough rural dormitory. He was, predictably and repeatedly, bullied and beaten. His roommate was a 17-year-old described in Huang's own retellings and in biographical sources as one of the toughest kids around, covered in tattoos and knife scars, and unable to read. Now, a lot of children in that situation would simply try to survive it, head down, counting the days. Jensen did something else. He struck a deal. He offered to teach his intimidating roommate how to read, and in exchange, the roommate taught Jensen how to bench press. Sit with that image for a second. A tiny, bookish immigrant kid and a scarred teenage tough trading literacy for muscle in a dormitory with reportedly no closet doors and no locks, where disputes were sometimes settled with knives. It is the kind of detail that sounds like a screenwriter invented it, and yet it holds up. This is not some myth that fell apart under scrutiny. Reporters, biographers, and encyclopedic sources have gone looking, and the core of the story checks out consistently across decades of Huang telling it himself. There are no credible debunkings of the fundamentals. After about 2 years, Jensen's parents finally arrived in the United States, discovered what had actually happened to their sons, and pulled them out. The family eventually settled in Oregon, and Jensen, far from being broken by Kentucky, would later say he remembers that period more vividly than almost any other in his life. He even thrived in unexpected corners of it, picking up table tennis well enough to become nationally ranked and to land in the pages of Sports Illustrated as a teenager. And the hardship didn't end when childhood did. As a teenager in Oregon, Jensen worked at Denny's, washing dishes, bussing tables, waiting on customers, learning the unglamorous rhythm of service work and graveyard shifts, which makes it all the more fitting, almost poetic, that years later he would sit down in a Denny's booth and sketch out the beginnings of NVIDIA in 1993. The restaurant that gave a teenage immigrant his first paychecks became the unofficial birthplace of a company that would one day be worth trillions. So when Jensen Huang talks about resilience, about low expectations, about embracing, in his own framing, generous doses of pain and suffering as the raw ingredients of success, he is not reciting a motivational poster he bought at an airport. He is describing a life he actually lived. The bathrooms were real, the bullying was real, the bench press deal was real. And this, more than the leather jacket or the missing watch, is the bedrock of the modest billionaire legend. The man genuinely came from almost nothing, scaled to almost everything, and the story is true, which is exactly why the harder questions matter so much, because a true origin story is one thing, but origins are the past. The real test of modesty isn't where you came from, it's what you do with the fortune once you have it. So let's follow the money. How he spends his money and how he spends his time. Here's a question that sounds simple but isn't. How does a man go from sketching a chip company in a Denny's booth to being one of the 8 richest people alive? Because the scale of Jensen Huang's wealth is genuinely difficult to wrap your head around, and understanding how it happened is the key to understanding whether the modest label survives contact with reality. Rewind to around 2019. At that point, Jensen Huang was worth approximately $3 billion. Now, $3 billion is an unfathomable amount of money to almost everyone on Earth, but in the world of tech titans it was, relatively speaking, modest. He was rich, not legendary. Then the artificial intelligence era arrived, and it arrived through NVIDIA's front door. For most of its life, NVIDIA was known as a company that made graphics cards for video games, the GeForce line, the thing that made your games look gorgeous. But quietly, over many years, NVIDIA had been building something far more important than pretty pixels, a software ecosystem called CUDA that turned its gaming chips into the ideal engines for the kind of massive parallel computation that artificial intelligence demands. So when ChatGPT detonated the AI hype cycle and the entire technology industry suddenly realized it needed mountains of specialized chips to train and run these models, there was essentially one company sitting on the supply. NVIDIA's chips became the essential infrastructure for the entire AI revolution, and the numbers that followed defy belief. By mid-2024, NVIDIA's market capitalization had crossed $3 trillion, and Huang's personal net worth had blasted past $90 to $100 billion. From there, it kept climbing, past $140 billion. and at moments briefly beyond $200 billion in 2026, with the company itself reaching valuations of more than $4 and even $5 trillion at various points, and frequently sitting as the single most valuable company on the planet. But here is the detail that is absolutely central to the whole modesty debate, so I want you to hold on to it. The overwhelming majority of Jensen Huang's wealth, by some estimates around 96% of it, is not cash sitting in a vault. It is Nvidia stock. His fortune is his roughly 3% ownership stake in the company he built. His actual salary and compensation, while large, is almost laughably small next to his net worth, in the range of $30 to $50 million recently. He didn't get this rich by paying himself enormous sums. He got this rich because he never stopped owning the company, and the company became indispensable. Why does this matter for modesty? Because stock isn't a swimming pool full of money you can dive into. It's illiquid, it's tied up. Selling huge amounts of it sends signals to the market and triggers enormous tax events. So in a very real structural sense, most of Jensen Huang's money was never available to be blown on superyachts in the first place. His interests are welded to Nvidia's long-term performance. When you hear modest billionaire, part of what you're actually seeing is a man whose wealth is, by its very nature, locked into the thing he cares about most, the company. So what does he spend on? Let's walk through the houses, because real estate is where the rubber meets the road for any modesty claim. His entire property portfolio is valued at roughly $53 million, with something like $55 million spent across decades of buying. The crown jewel is a modern limestone mansion in San Francisco's exclusive Pacific Heights neighborhood, the stretch sometimes called the Gold Coast or Billionaire's Row. He bought it in 2017 for north of $38 million. It's around 11,400 square feet, with Golden Gate views, a theater, a gym, wine rooms, the full suite of things you'd expect at that price. Then there's an estate in Los Altos Hills near Nvidia's headquarters bought decades ago for around $7 million, complete with pool and landscaping. And finally, an oceanfront home in Maui's gated Wailea resort, purchased for somewhere around $7 to $8 million. Now let me be completely honest with you, because that's the whole point of this video. These are not modest homes by any normal human standard. A $38 million mansion with Golden Gate views is, by any reasonable definition, a palace. If you saw it, you would not think humble. You would think wealthy beyond imagination. But, and this is the crucial but, context is everything. Set that $53 million portfolio against a net worth that has touched $200 billion. Do the math on what fraction of his fortune his entire collection of homes represents, and it rounds down to almost nothing, a minuscule sliver. Compare it to the billionaires who assemble $100 million compounds and sprawling international trophy portfolios, and Huang looks downright restrained. And critically, there is no credible report of Jensen Huang personally owning a super yacht, no private island, no fleet of supercars, no rocket company, no space venture with his name on it. The big, loud status symbol toys that define the modern billionaire imagination are simply absent from his life. He does use private jets for international business travel. That much is true and well documented, and it's a genuine luxury, justified by security and the brutal demands of his schedule. He's not pretending to fly economy. But it's worth noting that Nvidia's broader company culture leans so hard into efficiency that some of its vice presidents reportedly fly economy class themselves. The thrift isn't just a personal quirk, it's baked into the institution he built. And then there's the philanthropy, which adds another layer to the grounded image. Through the Jensen and Lori Huang Foundation, seeded with Nvidia stock that has since ballooned into billions in assets, Huang has made major tangible gifts to education and research. He gave $50 million to Oregon State University, his alma mater, for an AI and innovation complex. He gave $30 million to Stanford for an engineering center. And in a gesture that closes the loop on his entire life story in the most moving way imaginable, he returned to that rough little reform academy in Kentucky, the one his uncle enrolled him in by mistake, and he and his wife donated around $2 million, with the school dedicating a building called Huang Hall in his honor. The boy who cleaned the toilets came back and put his name on the building. Now, the picture isn't flawless. Critics point out that a lot of his giving flows through donor-advised funds, a perfectly legal but tax-advantaged structure that lets the money sit before it's distributed. And partly because of this, Forbes has actually given his philanthropy a fairly low score on its own metrics. So this isn't a man giving away everything he has in a blaze of saintly generosity, but the tangible impact in classrooms and research labs is real and visible. So far, the modesty story story is holding up remarkably well. Humble origins, verified. Restrained spending relative to his fortune, confirmed. No flashy toys, confirmed. But there's a part of this man's life we haven't examined yet, and it's the part where the gentle, zen-like public image starts to feel like only half the truth. Because to understand Jensen Huang, you cannot just look at how he spends his money. You have to look at how he spends his time, and how he expects everyone around him to spend theirs. Here is a man who has openly, almost proudly, thrown the entire concept of work-life balance into the trash. In his own words, he works from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, 7 days a week. And when he's not working, he's thinking about working. He said he sits through movies but doesn't remember them because his mind is on the company. Asked about work-life balance directly, his answer was essentially that he thinks it's great, and then he described working all day, every day, all 7 of them. He has said he lives to work, not the other way around. And he doesn't just live this way himself, he builds it into the company. NVIDIA's culture is routinely described as one of the most hardcore and intense in all of technology. 60-hour weeks as the baseline, 80+ during crunches, with a flat structure where dozens of people report directly to Huang and where the watchword is extreme accountability. There's nowhere to hide. Huang himself has cheerfully admitted he's a relentless perfectionist who criticizes essentially everything, saying you can't go a day at NVIDIA without some form of critique. He's compared it to strict Taiwanese parenting, where nothing is ever quite good enough, and he has described constant feedback as his own personal form of torture. And then there's the line that perhaps captures him best, the one where the gentle engineer and the demanding general fuse into a single person. On why he pushes employees relentlessly rather than giving up on them, Huang has said he would rather torture them into greatness than let them fail, comparing himself to a coach who believes in the team so much that he drives them toward a greatness they didn't know they had. So who is this man, really? The humble janitor who came back to fund the school, or the perfectionist who tortures people into greatness and forgets the movies he watches because he's thinking about chips? The answer, of course, is both. And in part 3, we're going to watch those two halves collide in public on a podcast, in front of millions, in the moment the calm finally broke. What the internet saw when his composure cracked. Everything we've covered so far paints a fairly coherent portrait: the humble origins, the restrained spending, the locked-up, stock-heavy fortune, the relentless but believing leader. It all points toward a man who is grounded, focused, and, yes, largely deserving of that modest billionaire label. But every carefully maintained image has a pressure point. And in the spring of 2026, the entire internet got to watch Jensen Huang's pressure point get pushed until something gave. The setting was the Dwarkesh Patel podcast, in an episode released on April 15, 2026. For most of the conversation, Huang was exactly the man you'd expect: patient, articulate, walking through the geography of the AI industry with the calm of someone who's explained it 1,000 times. But then the conversation turned to the single most politically radioactive question in his world: should the United States allow NVIDIA to sell advanced AI chips to China? The host pressed hard, playing devil's advocate, raising every national security concern in the book. The idea that advanced chips in Chinese labs could accelerate offensive cyber capabilities, analogies comparing the chips to enriched uranium. The argument that maybe NVIDIA was going to lose the China market anyway, so why take the risk? And it was that last premise, the idea that NVIDIA was destined to lose, that lit the fuse. Because if there is one thing this man, this former toilet cleaning, bullied, immigrant kid who built a company through near-death experience after near-death experience, cannot tolerate, it's the assumption of defeat. Reports of the moment described him as nearly losing his composure, dropping the smooth keynote voice, his tone sharpening, his intensity climbing, and then came the line that got clipped and shared across Instagram and X and every corner of the internet, the one that crystallized everything underneath the leather jacket. Pushing back on the idea that NVIDIA would simply lose the Chinese market, Huang said, "You're not talking to somebody who woke up a loser. That loser attitude, that loser premise makes no sense to me. You're not talking to somebody who woke up a loser? That is not the sentence of a Zen-like, detached philosopher. That is the sentence of a fighter. And it tells you that the calm we've been describing all video isn't the absence of fire. It's a lid on top of it." Now, to be fair to him, the substance underneath the fire was serious, not just bluster. His actual argument was strategic. He contended that keeping Chinese developers working on the American technology stack on NVIDIA's CUDA ecosystem serves America's long-term interests far better than walling them off and forcing them to build their own competing systems on Huawei's hardware. He argued that conceding the world's second-largest market would be, in his framing, an extremely foolish and and horrible outcome for the United States. He pointed out that he'd already publicly called U.S. export controls a failure, noting that Nvidia's market share in affected segments of China had collapsed and that the restrictions had simply spurred Chinese self-reliance. But not everyone took the argument at face value, and this is where we have to confront the most pointed criticism leveled at Jensen Huang, one that cuts directly against the humble engineer image. It's the accusation that he is, in essence, an arms dealer. The metaphor came from a widely cited New Yorker profile, which framed it memorably. There's a war going on in AI, and Nvidia is the only arms dealer. The critique is that Nvidia sells the essential weapons of the AI race to everyone: American giants, Chinese firms where permitted, startups, even rivals, profiting from all sides of the competition, while Huang maintains the pose of a neutral, humble builder of mere tools. And so when he argues passionately for selling chips to China, skeptics see not principle but profit, a man defending his own market and dressing it up as national strategy. It's a sharp criticism, and it has genuine merit as an observation about Nvidia's business model. The company really does profit from every side of the AI race, from American hyperscalers and Chinese firms alike, and the humble engineer narrative does sit a little awkwardly next to a company with de facto control over the infrastructure of AI itself. But notice what the critique actually is and what it's not. It's a critique of his business and his incentives. It is not a scandal about his character, his lifestyle, or his honesty. Nobody is alleging he secretly lives in gilded excess or that the toilet cleaning origin story was fabricated. The attack is on the economics of the company, not the modesty of the man. And that distinction is the entire key to understanding why his personal reputation survives even as his business draws fire. Consider the contrast with the other great face of the AI era, Sam Altman of OpenAI. Despite sitting at the absolute center of the AI boom, Huang has largely escaped the intense, personal, existential backlash that follows Altman everywhere. Why? Because Nvidia builds the picks and shovels rather than the consumer-facing models that spark fears about jobs and misinformation and the future of humanity. Because Huang frames everything in concrete engineering terms: supply chains, energy, infrastructure, rather than grand philosophical promises. And because he carries no board coups, no Twitter feuds, no major personal scandals, the grounded persona isn't just an image, it functions as genuine structural insulation. But even his own backyard isn't entirely peaceful. Take the gamers, the very community that built Nvidia in the first place. In 2026, Nvidia unveiled a technology called DLSS5, an AI-driven leap in graphics rendering. Parts of the gaming community revolted, complaining it produced a homogenized, waxy AI slop, look that overrode artistic vision. And how did the humble engineer respond when a reporter raised the criticism at a press event? Bluntly, he said the critics were completely wrong. That phrase, completely wrong, landed as dismissive and condescending, and the backlash intensified, feeding into a longer-running grievance that Nvidia had abandoned the gamers who built it in favor of high-margin AI chips, with graphics card prices soaring and availability cratering as silicon got diverted to the data center gold rush. But then watch what happened next, because it tells you something important about the man. Shortly afterward, on the Lex Fridman podcast, asked about that very same controversy, the tone shifted entirely. He didn't fully retract the completely wrong, and he didn't apologize. But he softened, conceding that the critics' perspective made sense, that he could see where they were coming from, and admitting, in his own words, that I don't love AI slop myself. He explained that DLSS5 stays faithful to the artist's original geometry rather than overriding it, but the emotional register had changed. The blunt fighter from the press room became the empathetic listener on the podcast. The same duality, surfacing again, conviction first, then reflection. It's the exact rhythm we saw with the loser line, an instinctive, almost combustible defense, followed by a more measured man explaining himself once the heat has passed. So now we arrive at the question we started with. Is Jensen Huang the modest billionaire everyone thinks he is? And after walking through all of it, here's the honest answer. Yes, largely. But modest doesn't mean what the internet sometimes thinks it means. He is not ascetic. He owns a $38 million mansion and flies on private jets. He is not gentle. He is a demanding perfectionist who tortures people into greatness, and who will tell you flatly that you're a loser if you assume he'll lose. He He is not a saint, his philanthropy scores low on some metrics, and the arms dealer critique of his business is real. But measured against what's actually possible at his altitude of wealth, against the yachts, the islands, the vanity space programs, the public meltdowns and feuds, the label holds up better than almost anyone else's at his level. His fortune is locked into the company he built rather than converted into spectacle. His habits are genuinely understated relative to his means. His origin story is real, not a marketing fable. And the fire we saw on that podcast doesn't actually contradict the modesty. It explains it. The man who cleaned 100 boys' toilets and taught his scarred roommate to read didn't become humble despite being a fighter. He became a fighter because of where he started, and the humility is just the calm a fighter learns to wear in public. So the modest billionaire is real. He's just not a soft one. Underneath the leather jacket and the missing watch is a man who came from nothing, built one of the most valuable companies in human history, gave a chunk of it back to the classrooms that shaped him, and who, when you suggest he might lose, will look you dead in the eye and remind you that he did not wake up a loser. That's about as modest and as admirable as it realistically gets at $200 billion. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.